Okay, today I'm going to talk about Isaac Asimov's essay, The Eureka Phenomenon. It's a great essay. Asimov is a great writer. I think he wrote like 400 books or so. He was a science fiction writer, plus he wrote the Asimov's Guide to the Bible, Asimov's Guide to Shakespeare, many books. He has a PhD. He had a PhD in chemistry. Basically, he wrote for an intelligent audience. I mean, he wrote for the general population. He wasn't writing for scholars and experts, but he was a beautiful writer. He could explain concepts and really make it interesting. Anyway, so I want to talk about Asimov's essay, "The Eureka Phenomenon," and it's a great essay for critical thinking because he deals with a myth about critical thinking that basically critical thinking lacks imagination, is basically simply mechanical. He starts out his essay telling a story about when he was working on his doctoral dissertation in chemistry. What would happen if he got stuck at a certain place? He couldn't proceed. Some chemistry problem. And this became a habit of his when he'd get stuck in any problem. What would happen? He'd get stuck in a problem, and he'd just keep his conscious mind would be working on it, but eventually get to a point where you can't solve it, and your mind just keeps going in circles, and it's basically useless. Most of us have had that experience where you get to a point trying to solve a problem where you can't solve it, and the more you work on it, the worse it gets. What he would do in a situation like that, he would just stop, and he would go to a movie, a movie that was light, didn't wouldn't take too much of his attention. And then he'd come out of the movie, and it could be a comedy or a detective story, whatever. He'd come out of the movie, and the problem would be solved. So what he concludes from that is he uses as an example of basically two levels of thinking. You've got conscious thought, which proceeds very methodically, step by step. And then you've got unconscious. There's things going on in your mind that you're not really aware of, and so unconscious connections are being made. And he believes that really the really creative thinking done by top level thinkers comes from beneath the surface. He gives the analogy of the two levels of thinking. As an analogy he gives to breathing. You can consciously breathe. If you start thinking about breathing, I mean, you kind of might get a little anxiety because you realize if you stop breathing, you're going to die. But if you start thinking that you need to breathe, then you start actually, consciously consciously breathing. What's going to happen is you're quickly going to get tired out. And so basically what you do is you just forget about it, and you will naturally breathe. You don't have to think about it. And so the same thing he says applies to thinking. If you're working on a problem and you get stuck and you just keep trying and trying to get it, you're gonna get tired out, and nothing's gonna happen. But just relax, go to a movie, go for a walk, go to sleep, forget about it. And then he says, if you put all that hard work into it, already, what's going to happen is that when you are relaxing, your unconscious is going to take over, unconscious thought processes, and the problem often will be solved. And then when it emerges into consciousness, it will appear to you as a revelation. You'll say, wow, it's a Eureka phenomenon. That I found it, Eureka. And it will come as a surprise. The essay is called The Eureka Phenomenon, and it's based upon a story about Archimedes, the great mathematician. I'll briefly tell the story really fast. The king Hiram, somebody had made him a crown of gold, and the king wanted to know if he had been cheated. He wants to know if the person who made the crown, kept some of the gold himself, kept a little of the gold for himself, and mixed in some copper and lesser materials into the crown. And so he asked Archimedes. Archimedes, the greatest mathematician in the world, he was one of his subjects, and he said, "Oh, can you solve this problem?" Well, unfortunately, calculus had not been discovered at that point. To solve the problem, you have to figure out the volume of a crown, which is an irregular solid. And since calculus had not been invented yet by Newton and Leibniz, a couple thousand years later, Archimedes had he couldn't do it. I mean, he had no idea how to figure it out. And he kept working on it, and nothing came. And then one day, in the public baths in Syracuse, he lowered himself into the tub, and the tub was filled up all the way to the top. So when he lowered his body into the tub, the water overflowed the tub. And then, Eureka, he had the answer. And he as the story goes, he ran through the streets of Syracuse naked. Eureka, Eureka, I solved it. And so that was really interesting. So it came as a sudden surprise. He could not have figured that out consciously. So he knew that. So he now had the answer. Take the crown, lower the crown into a tub of water, fill up to the very top. Have a little spigot in the tub, and as you lower the crown into the tub, the volume of the crown will displace the identical volume of water, and then that water will flow into a tub, and then water seeks its own level. So then you can measure it. You just measure it, find the volume of a cube. It's easy. It's not a regular solid anymore. So anyway, so he uses Eureka. That's what it's called, the Eureka Phenomenon, using Archimedes. And Asimov says that that's that experience of the unconscious workings taking over. He says that he wonders how often does that happen in the history of science, or not only in science but in literature and the arts. But here in this case, in this essay, he's talking about science. How often does that happen? And he suspects that it happens very often. But he thinks it's a shame that he says there's a conspiracy. Obviously, he's being kind of facetious. There's a conspiracy to hide this fact. And he says when scientists write up their results in their scientific journals and they explain, how they explain their theory, he says usually what they do is they leave out the imagination. They leave out the Eureka experience. They present the process in a very logical, step-by-step, methodical manner. This is, you start with this logic, and you reason logically. You do these experiments, and you get the result. So, for example, with Einstein's E equals mc squared, if you read his paper, you'll get the logical proof. But what you're going to miss is the sudden Eureka experiences that Einstein experienced to get to those results. And he also mentions the Watson, Crick and Watson's discovery of DNA. He says when you read the account of their discovery of DNA, you get no idea whatsoever of these Eureka experiences that accompanied the discovery. And he thinks it's a shame. He thinks, and one reason it's a shame is because it makes it look like there's this great distinction, this divide between reason, which scientists are committed to, and then creativity or the revelation, these revelations of truth that you find in these Eureka experiences that come to you unbidden. And he says scientists present themselves they value reason. They want to be seen as rational creatures. They're not like artists who are subject to these fits of inspiration. So they don't want to be associated with the revelation. They want to be associated with reason. So he says as a result, these Eureka experiences are left out of the scientific accounts. And so when you read the scientific accounts, you get the impression that critical thinking is simply a matter of methodical reasoning and induction and so on, and it has nothing to do with revelation. So on the one hand, you have science is associated with reason, and revelation is associated with the mystics and religion and so on. You could also think of anyway. So that's what Asimov his essay is about. It's a beautiful essay for critical thinking because what Asimov shows is that reason and revelation they complement each other, and critical thinking is not simply a methodical, mechanical process that can be described, in an objective, methodical way, but involves it when it's at the top level of thinking, involves these eureka experiences, these moments of revelation. He gives another example of Kekule, who is Kekule. He's the one guy, the chemist, who discovered the structure of the benzene molecule. So when people nowadays, he's basically the father of organic chemistry. So if you're taking a course in organic chemistry, you'll read about or at some point in the book, you'll read about the benzene molecule, and basically before Kekule, I mean, he was also the one. If you've seen chemistry books, you see these Tinker Toy things, carbon molecules and hydrogen, and they're all related in Tinker Toy fashion. But what Kekule was trying to do was solve to try to figure out how benzene was structured, and using this type of model, the straight, everything's straight, linear model. There's no solution to that. So he worked on it for like 7 years, and nobody could figure it out. Nobody in the whole world could figure it out. So anybody that would figure it out, if they had the Nobel Prize back then, they would have won the Nobel Prize. He worked on it for like 7 years. The Tinker Toy model wasn't working. So what happened? One day he was like, this is before they had cars, so he was in a coach, and the methodical stepping of the horses, the trotting, he went into put him into a half sleep. So he started dreaming, and in his dream, these Tinker Toys that were linear, they started bending, and they turned into a circular form. And that was actually the solution. It's like C. These are C for carbons. Like, how is it? Like, yeah, these C. Anyway, it's like a circle. And C, it's basically a circular, and then the hydrogen atoms are on the outside. So that was a solution to the structure of the benzene molecule. You have to take these Tinker Toys and bend them into a circular form. 7 years he was working on that, and he wasn't getting anywhere. And then in a dream, his unconscious took over, and his unconscious thought took over, and then he had this eureka experience. And in the essay here, I'll show you basically. You could see a circular. And before he was working with this, the linear right here. And he worked on that for 7 years, and then on a dream he got that. So when you take a course in organic chemistry, probably what happens, I'm not sure, but in a chemistry book, probably students are given this as an assignment, and they probably go, "Oh, I got to read about benzene molecule," and they go home and it's so boring. Well, if you're not told the story, if you're never told the story of how Kekule discovered it, then it would be boring. But anyway, in his day, he would have got the Nobel Prize. And how did he get it? He didn't get it through conscious thinking. He got it through a dream. It's a eureka experience. Now, Asimov says, scientists, they like to be thought of as rational, great thinkers. They don't like to be thought of as, how did you get your result? Oh, well, I went to sleep. So that kind of is not too, good for their prestige and their self-esteem. So Asimov thinks it's a shame that the way unconscious thoughts take over and create this eureka experience. He thinks people need to know about that. And scientists, he says, should not be ashamed of it. They should publicize, let people know. They have to put the hard work into it first, and then if they're prepared, they'll be open to it.